Thanks for joining us on Coast to Coast Pest Talk.
Yeah. So there's that tension and relief between having too many technicians and spending money on investing in the future and being cranking busy, and you can't do anything else but everyone's in the field doing work. But you have a lot of money.
Right. And my long-term vision, and it's probably more what you end up doing in the position where you're at, but it's like once you have 4 techs, if you get enough work for a 5th tech, you can ask all of them potentially to increase their workload by 25%.
Right.
And you'd be running a pot, but you're not going to kill anyone, right? And then you hire that 5th tech and you're back to equilibrium and you're good. But when you have 2 techs and one of them's out on paternity leave, if you're like, hey, we're just cranking, you can't ask your 1 tech to double his workload, right?
Yeah.
So
for sure. So I think this brings up some of what I was thinking about. I get this question a lot about how do you get yourself worked out of the field?
That's right.
I think that's a big problem for a lot of the small operators when you're looking at going from one-man operation to out of the field. Everybody likes to say, work on your business, not in your business, but then one tells you how to do that.
That's right.
You're kind of just like, okay, that sounds great. Okay, so I just hire people. That's all I do, and then now I'm working on the business, or
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's a fantastic segue. And it seems, I don't know, I'd love to just hear your thoughts on it, but it seems to me what I'm realizing is that things go in cycles.
Sure.
So you'll have seasons where you have lots of extra cash and you can take some of those risks. You have seasons where you have less cash or more time or less time or more manpower or less manpower, and then you have one of the reasons why I'm staffing heavy, because I've got a baby due in August.
Yeah, right.
So I need to be out of the field for at least for a couple weeks, and then probably around home for a while after that.
Yeah.
So you got the personal life cycles as well that play into that. So
Sure.
I've been seeing that okay, you got to kind of know when to jump onto the merry-go-round and when to jump off the merry-go-round.
Yeah. I think your feeling about having 4 technicians is a really solid one, because I think it comes down to arithmetic. So if you have 1 technician, right, and then unless you're growing at an irresponsible breakneck pace, right, you can be, I'm out of the field, and you're you have 1 technician. Well, yeah, but I'm going to have 4 technicians 2 months from now. You're like, okay, well that's
the one
that's
technician is doing $850K a year.
Yeah, but what I've seen, when you get to that point where I think the magic number might be around 4 technicians, because you're right.
That's where it feels.
If you take another whole full-time equivalent technician hours and divide it across 4 people, that's what, 2 hours for each of them a day?
Yep.
Right. So that's an amount of overtime or capacity that you can sort of stretch your people towards.
Yeah.
And at that time, then you're not the shock absorber. But less than that, if you have 2 technicians and then the owner and whatever, those 2 technicians would need to take on 4 hours a day of overtime. There's no way. Which means they might take.
You could push
1 or
that.
2.
You could say, hey, we're going to do this for 2 weeks. And they're
Right.
like, cool. You're like, hey, we're going to do this for 3 months while we train this guy. They're like,
Right.
no, bye.
No, which means the owner gets pulled back into the
That's right. Yeah.
into the fold for the
Yep.
other, say, 4 hours or 5 hours a day of
Yep.
sort of halftime in and out of the field. I think what happens to people, though, is I think they lose sight of the long term and they get drawn back into field work because it's comfortable, and they're like, oh, I guess I'm just gonna do this, and they never pull themselves completely out.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, man, there's a lot of stuff in this, but one of the things that's been rumbling around in my mind a lot the last 6 months has been kind of like what you said. You lose sight of that long term, and I think one of the big things, and this is going to sound spiritual, but
Uh-oh.
people just take it how they will. I think that we aren't good at having faith.
Mm,
Like, and I mean that actually spiritually, but also in just like you looking towards the future, which is uncertain. You're not totally, and like being willing to like take some steps, not crazy,
yeah,
stupid risks, but like just take some steps that are uncomfortable.
yeah.
And um, yeah, I think there's a lot of ways that plays out, but
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Because what I've seen is as you add people, like it seems like whatever amount of capacity I add, it just fills. You just have to have faith that
yep,
it's gonna come. I think you can be foolhardy and just go, well, I'll just hire 10 people and we'll just do, you
yeah,
see that happen. But as long as it's metered with like an understanding, a sense of what you're doing, historical financials of what you've done in the past and what's reasonable to expect. Um, I will totally steal one of Holly's analogies that she was talking about the other day. I think she talked. Did she talk about being in a cash booth?
I don't know. I don't think
Oh
so.
my God. Okay, so I have this analogy, and she actually made it a lot better. Um, with what we're doing with our long term strategy, keeping our eye on the long term strategy means that we have to give up stuff right now. So
Right.
I've always likened it to our in season work. So we're mostly commercial, so we don't want to, we're not trying to take all the residential. But in season, it's like you're in one of those cash booths and they're blowing dollar
Oh,
bills, right? And the dollar bills are just flying all around, right? And
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
usually, and that's all that residential work. It's just money raining from the sky, and you just try to grab up every bit you can. Like that's the plan. For us, what we have to do is just stand there and not grab any of that, and have that long term vision and have that faith that we're going to be successful in that long term. But where she took that analogy and it made it a little better. She goes, well, really, it's like we're in there and there's $100 bills flying around, and that's that residential work, and that but there's $1 bills, and then there's a couple $100 bills, and that's that commercial work, and you
Right.
have to stand there and just go, boom, I want that.
Yep.
That's our little bit. That's our client right there.
Yep.
But yeah, that was her whole thing. But yeah, you have to have that faith that like you can you can cut work, you can design your client base around what you're trying to do, and that you'll be okay in the long run. But that's not
Yeah.
natural for people, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And you brought up um, that however much capacity within reason you expand, that it seems like the work volume, the workload just fills into that. And that's, yeah, my father-in-law had a famous saying. He would always say, what sales tends to grow. What's he say? Work tends to grow according to the time allotted to it, which was always like, so if you, he always used it in the negative, right? So if you have a project and you say, well, it needs to get done in 8 hours, it's going to take 8 hours
Yeah.
or longer. But if
Yeah.
you have the same project and you say, I need this done in 5.5 hours, it's going to get done in 5.5 hours, right? So you have that side, but then there's that same type of principle applies where it just seems like if you have the capacity, uh, work and sales and volume ends up just coming in, because I think we don't realize um, how much volume and sales we aren't getting
Mm,
because we don't have quite enough capacity to deal with it.
sure.
How many missed opportunities. It's really hard, super hard to calculate those. And so I think, yeah, we don't realize, oh, if you just hired another tech, you could capitalize, your close rate would double or triple or whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah, for sure. Now, have you found yourself um, get frustrated because you get pulled back into the field? Like, do you have the shoulds? I should be doing this. I should be out of the field by now. Where like, but you're on this long because it's a long term trajectory.
Yeah. Um, and especially, like I said, it's weird. I don't know if it's normal, but I felt like there's just odd cycles to it where between your seasonal cycles and stuff, where sometimes, especially in this transition, you're having to kind of play this like back in the field to store up cash so that we can hire somebody, so we can get out of the field, so that we can,
Yeah.
and then you get out of the field and you're like, okay, but now I have a tech who's not totally busy all the time. So now I'm out of the field and I need to hit sales so I can fill up his pipeline. It's like,
Yep.
it's really an interesting kind of cyclical balancing act. And I think you have to know what pieces to put in what place at the right time,
Mm-hmm.
or you end up kind of having to go back to the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
For sure. For sure. Yeah. And one of the things that I have done, like, because you're right in the middle of like this hinge period, right? You're like crossing a bridge right now, and you're
Yeah.
in the middle of it, and it's a long bridge. It's a
The
long
bridge is
walk.
cracking.
No, it's not. Oh my gosh. So one of the things that I did that I really liked while I was in that like hinge period was that I would use my field time to basically simplify and systematize what we were doing in the field. So if I'm going to be out in the field doing a service that I've done, over 30 years, a million times, I'll have a notebook with me and I'll like write down, okay, I always want to do this thing this way and that way. Because a lot of people will struggle in that hinge period of having written procedures and,
Yeah. Right.
and like documenting sort of like, okay, how are we supposed to do a rodent service? How do we do a ant service? And when you're out there doing it, that's the best time you're going to think of things as you're walking around the house and do it. Oh yeah, I always look for this, or I always do bait this way, or this little tip. That's a great time to sort of log those away, because I think at that time frame, you're trying to systematize and simplify those things so that they can better be delegated and not
Yes.
come back to you. Because what people do is they'll delegate to their new guy, and then their new guy calls them with a question, and then another question, another question,
Yep.
another question.
Yep.
Which isn't bad. You want them to do that, but you also want to be able to go, okay, here's our documentation, here's our standard operating procedures for that service. Because then the calls can be, okay, that's great. Can you pull your binder out? Open up to the page on that. Okay, what does it say to do in that situation? Okay, it says this. Okay, do you need any more help with that? Or is it a weird special thing, special sort of situation you haven't run into? Because
Next time, don't call me until you consult your binder.
That's right. Well, and people will figure that out. People
Yeah,
will figure
totally.
that out. But
Yeah.
I think that's a good opportunity in that hinge time frame.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
the other side of that is what you're saying is you do get pulled in 100 different directions where you're shifting. Where okay, I'm in the field a little, and then I'm doing quality control, and then I'm doing some sales, and then I'm doing some customer service, and I'm also doing bookkeeping. The other thing I always thought of was every single one of those shifts was you put on a different hat. That hat is what you need to be doing is eventually handing it to someone.
Yes.
Okay, so my bookkeeping hat is now this person's. My sales hat is now this person's. So knowing that like each one of those is a different personality type and job as you're shifting between them
Yeah.
can help. Same thing. You're kind of thinking of those. What makes somebody good at this part of this job? And then find that person to hand them that responsibility. And
Yeah.
and don't try to grab it back from them because that happens too.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. And on that same note, so like this last year, so we hired a bookkeeper a couple months ago, just part time.
Yep.
And I'm really big on content, but I've been realizing that I'm like, I just can't, like, I love it. I love getting a great shot, but like long term, I'm not going to be able to like be the content guy. So
Yeah.
we hired a part-time content person. One of the things I'm realizing is part-time help can be a really helpful way to bridge some of those gaps where you can say, I have this hat, I don't have enough to pay somebody a full-time salary.
Yep.
It's just 12 hours a week or whatever. That if you find the right person who's like, oh yeah, I'll do that part-time. Sure, that sounds like fun. I love that.
Mhm.
Like the bookkeeper. I'm like, he loves like he actually does bookkeeping for a living. Like
Yeah.
he loves it,
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is wrong with you in your brain that like you love bookkeeping? I hate bookkeeping. Like we should be friends,
Perfect.
Yeah. So just leveraging those more part-time hires. I guess maybe I just haven't been at the size where I've even been considering that, but now we are getting to that volume.
Yeah.
We're this Friday, we're hiring a part-time office help on Fridays, and then it'll be Fridays and Saturdays. So we'll have somebody to answer phones on Saturdays.
Yep.
But same thing, just kind of leveraging that. And our main gal, Donna, she's going to do 4 days a week. So we won't even have a huge extra labor burden.
Oh, nice.
So she's going to cover Monday through Thursday, and then this gal's going to cover Friday, and then eventually on Saturdays. So,
Nice.
kind of cool.
Yeah. So that's a great point too. Is if you can have part-time labor for those tasks that don't warrant a full-time person quite yet. You're not a big enough operation, but it can pull some of those hats away where you're like, okay, I don't need somebody to do, accounts receivables 5 days a week. I'm not big enough for that, so I'm gonna have somebody do it 1 day a week.
Yeah.
I don't have bookkeeping like a Fortune 500 company, so 1 day a week or every other week, whatever whatever you need.
Yeah.
That's a great way to do it. And I think some of those like fractionalized CFO and bookkeeping services can be good if you don't have somebody directly like the PCO bookkeepers or Fraction or something like that.
Yes.
That are industry specific, or I'm sure there's options too that are, bookkeeping services and whatnot. Now, your guy, is he self-employed? Is he his own bookkeeper guy, or is he?
No, he does
part of
books for a really big company here locally.
Okay.
And then he's got like 3 or 4 kind of side people, small businesses like mine that he just does on the weekends and stuff. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I think there's a book, Who Not How. I can't remember who the author is, but that's a pretty good one that talks a bit about this. That when you have a job that needs to be done, you need a who. You don't need to figure out how to do it. You don't need to figure out how to do books. You need to figure out who likes to do books and go find that person.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think it's opened my eyes more to that, like people are so different, giftings are so different and varied, and you can have it makes me realize like, oh man, you could actually build an amazing team of people that all love doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is really cool.
If you got people, everybody's like a fish in water and it's all different. That's exactly what you need. So I've seen a lot of folks struggle through this for a long time and never make it out.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have, where you have the 1, 2 man, 2.5, and then they're back down to 1. And then it's
totally.
Like 10s and 15, 20 years. And you're like, oh my goodness. So what are those people doing wrong? What do you think? Why can't they get out of there?
Okay. I'll tell you what I actually think. I think there's a lot of reasons, but I think the big one, and just push back if you think this is dumb.
Yeah.
But I saw this a bunch. I did a little like in the car recording of this like 3 weeks ago. I saw this a bunch in the oil change industry, and I've seen it here as well in this industry. I think a lot of it has to do with people not being able to get their head above the break-even mark for their business size.
Okay.
And
now, is that on the costs? Is that on the pricing side? Do you think they're underpricing themselves? Do you think they're just not getting enough volume?
Volume. Usually it's a volume issue, a volume and a scale issue. Okay. It's a volume versus their fixed costs issue.
Yeah, sure.
That's the big thing. So you've got a guy, and he's worked for a company for a bunch of years. He launched this company, and he's 40, and he's trying to live a halfway comfortable life, right? So he's going to pull $80K plus a year out of his business, right? Because he's wanting to live a normal middle class life, and that's a huge drain on a tiny business.
Sure.
And then he's got his other, and he goes and he gets a loan on a truck, and he's got that kind of fixed cost at the beginning, et cetera, et cetera. So in order to generate enough cash to make up for that, and then you start hiring people, and all of a sudden that takes away from some of the cash. It takes some decent scale to break through some of those early on fixed costs, and I think people get discouraged. I think they grow, and they're themselves, and they're working themselves to death, working 68, 80 hours a week, 100 hours a week, and they're making good money, and then they hire someone, but they're still out in the field and they're just cranking, hire another guy, cranking, but they still haven't really broken past the point where they're out of the field and covering those fixed costs well, fully, and cash flowing on top of that. And I think people just get tired and they're like, if this is what it's always going to be like, then I'm just going to stay small. I'm going to keep it small. And, if I grow double this, I'm not going to make any more, right? That's kind of, I think, almost the mentality. I don't know. I haven't verified that against a bunch of people. But that's the vibe I've gotten. And we talked because we purchased multiple companies with the quick lube stuff. And that was kind of ended up being the case, because it was like the moment we got in there with a growth mindset and operation procedures in place and good culture. It's like those businesses were like,
yeah,
but we already had the volume.
Right. So if you're a one-man operation, you can do very well.
Yeah.
Right. No question. You can,
of course.
if you want to stay there and be a one-man operation, you can live a great life in this industry.
Yep.
And make a ton of money.
Yep.
You can do very, very well. Now, if you're that person that wants to not stay a one-man operation, let's say you've had a couple years, you got regular customers, you do okay, but you got dreams of growing. What do they need to do this year, to get to so that they got somebody with them next year and they're on their way? These are hard questions too. We're going at it.
I'd say number one is document your process, document your procedure. Get your SOPs in place. I don't know, what would you say? Like just big picture stuff.
Yeah. I think probably I think I would save some money.
Yeah.
I would have some money saved. Stock up on ramen noodles.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. For us, I would try to find part-time help or seasonal help for that.
That's
first
a good idea. Yeah,
I would not jump in both feet with a full-time year-round guy. If I was just me, I would say, okay, I'm going to find somebody that's going to be seasonal help for this year that I can train on some of the easiest low-end, commercial spray job type stuff that they can take over for this year while I maintain a little more capacity. Next year, maybe the same thing, probably hire a full-time guy that next year that's sort of like okay, you're going to be with me now. And I might even do that another year, another part-time guy and then a full-time guy. It's a slower process, than some of them. If we were to door knock and you're going to be like, hey, we're putting on 5 technicians a year and whatever. I mean,
right.
that you can do that. You can't maintain the quality like what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it if you want to sell your soul and sell your business to.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I think I would go part-timer or a seasonal guy, the first one, and then hire your first full guy that next year. And then you're kind of off to the races. If you have a good, in that year and a half time frame, you're right. I think I would get my training documentation together, because honestly, before you know it, it's weird, but like that first year, you're just, let's say, by yourself, and then you're going to hire a seasonal guy. That's when you need to have your training stuff put together already, at least a basis. Get a notepad and have one sheet that's for each job you do, and then write down all the material you use for that job, all the procedures that you want to do for that job, how much that job costs for how big of a house, let's say, or up to 3,000 square feet, it costs this much, or guidelines for the pricing. And it can be a lot of different things, but have it so that then you can have, okay, we're doing a spider service. You need this piece of equipment, this material. Here's how you mix it. Here's how much it costs. So you can teach that next person. Because I see a lot of these ones where they'll get somebody on and then the training isn't really there. And honestly, some companies that get to shocking sizes that don't have written standard operating procedures.
Yeah, right.
10, 15, 20 technicians. And you're like, geez, I think we should write down our policies and procedures. I think if you do it really early on, it can help.
Step 1, spray the house. Kill bugs.
Drive to the next house.
Drive to house. Spray it too.
Spray that one too. Oh my God.
No, you're
Yeah.
totally right. I would say um, that's great. I think that's really good insight. I would lean probably more towards the plan on hiring a full-time guy right off the gate, but make sure you have money set aside.
Sure.
Um,
Yep.
if you can find the right guy, if you can find the guy that you know you want to keep.
That's a good
So
point.
like, we're tiny still, only been around for 4 years, but I have my first hire still.
Mm-hmm.
And I ate crow for 5 months of my winter and fall season and paid for his salary
By ate crow, you mean you killed crows and grilled them, right? Is that what you mean?
and
To
sold
feed your
them.
family? Yeah.
And I knew we weren't making I was like, we're making enough to cover his salary during our busy months, but I know we're not gonna.
Yeah.
But we had cash money in the bank, and I said it's worth it for me to have a top-notch guy that I know I can trust, that I'm not gonna have to retrain later. But I think there's merit to both, and I really appreciate the wisdom of like, yeah, consider maybe just doing a temp person over the summer so you can take advantage of that increased lead flow, and then let them go when things get slow,
Yeah.
and kind of build up that customer base.
Well, and I'm thinking in the context of you don't have a war chest of cash.
That's right.
And you don't want to take a loan.
Like you're gonna bootleg this.
Yeah, I'm assuming that the growth has to be self-funded. That's
Yes.
always been my assumption. I always did it like a self-funded thing.
Yep.
So like I have no cash and I have no loan, and I'm gonna do this stepwise so that I don't lose out, right?
Yes.
If you have cash, now that's an interesting point you say to hire the guy right out. If you find the right person, I'm definitely for like you capture that person, right? If you know it is the right person. Now, why?
And you don't have to make that call right away, right? You hire them in the
sure.
spring. They work
And
all summer. You're like,
see
this
how it
is the
is.
guy I want. And you say, yeah, we're going to just do this.
Yeah. Make that sacrifice for that person. Yeah. And we've had those things where people come along and you're like, I'm not looking to hire somebody, but I cannot pass up on the opportunity to have this person as part of our team. And
Yep.
you bring them in. You're like, whenever they come along, you don't know when you're going to meet Mr. or Mrs. Right. You just got to be ready for it, right? When it happens. Now, why would you spend that if you had cash? Why would you spend that on payroll for the guy versus just putting it into SEO or AdWords or marketing some way to capture more revenue?
Yeah, I think that's also a good idea. And probably do both. But I think recognize that, winter is when everything's the most expensive for all your ads and stuff anyways. So you're going to be getting a lower return on that. And it wasn't like he was making nothing for the company. I still had him out working. It was more like I'm gonna be supplementing this. Bet.
So as I ask the question, I'm thinking how I would answer it too, and I would think if you have the option to put the money into an asset like an employee that you know is the right person,
Yeah.
that is a perishable commodity.
Right.
You have one opportunity to capture that commodity. Will Google still sell you AdWords next year? Yep. Well, can you?
Oh, so you're saying like if you had the option between keeping a guy on,
Yep.
or no, yeah, 100%. I thought you were saying you keep the guy on, but then you pay for the Google ads to keep him busy so he can cash flow himself.
Well, I'm just saying because if you had cash flow, or if you had cash sitting there, right, and you can spend it on payroll as you're not making enough to pay his payroll, you're pulling out of your reserves.
Yeah.
Or you can spend it on advertising to try to get more revenue at the front end, but then risking like you might not be able to make payroll for them.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking the person, the staff member takes priority 100%. Because it's a perishable commodity. They're going to be gone. You can buy ads. You can market in the future. Opportunities will be there to sell your wares always. That person only comes along once in a while.
That's right. And we don't take seriously how much, first off, how valuable it is to have the right person on the bus. Like just that.
Right.
But then how dang expensive it is to have to, and such a hassle. Like, any small business out there, like when you lose a key employee and you're having to go through that interview process again, it's just tens and tens and tens and tens of hours and stress, and then you're covering shifts, and it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it starts looking like covering $1,500 a month, to make sure he still is good and on board for a few months, it starts looking pretty nice compared to having to redo everything from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I absolutely agree. Yep. Okay.
Oh man, this is there's so much in this topic to jump into. I'm curious, like, so you have that initial jump, you hire that first guy, whatever way. And at some point you get it so that you have the volume, but you run into the exact same problem that you were in at the very beginning.
Again, now, yeah.
You're out in the field again full time.
Yep.
But now you have the additional burden of management and caring for another team member and
Yeah.
payroll and all that. So now this is actually worse than before, Andy. I thought we were scaling out of this and making things better. This is actually worse.
That's the thing. I think the reason people don't end up working themselves out of this is that you have to drive into the heart of the tornado, right? You have to go into the storm.
You let the dragon eat you.
Exactly. You're in the belly of the fish, like Jonah or whatever.
That's right.
And you got to come back out again. So it gets worse before it gets better, right? And because you'll have to repeat that same process of finding that right person, bringing them on, getting them trained up, having a million questions. It takes productivity away from you from working on the business because now you're answering a million questions and you're doing field work and whatever. But you got to do that 2-3 times, and then you will have worked yourself out of the business and you can work on it. But I think people think like, oh, I hired a guy, and because I've heard people say this, oh, don't get employees. You're just going to make less money. I'm like, yeah, at first you are, but like you got to get across that bridge and then
that is
get to the other side.
Dumbest statement I've ever heard.
I've heard it many times.
Oh yeah,
many times.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, and kind of the spin behind it is usually it's just not worth the hassle, right? That's what it always ends up coming. It's not. People are hard. It's not worth the hassle, and and I think I'm thankful. Like I've seen the other side, and I'm right in the middle of. I'm in like the discouraging, really hard part right now. So it's hard. It's totally hard. But I think you can attest to, and I can attest to have seen in the past. But you can attest right now that like there's daylight on the other side of this.
For sure. You got to have faith.
Boom.
Yeah. You do. Well, and I think when you're saying people are hard, I have to think that for a lot of folks, that is a statement that reflects more about them than it does about their staff.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the difficulty people have with other people is just a reflection of the difficulty they have within themselves.
Yeah, they're like, people are hard, and then they have 2.1 stars on Google. And you're like, yeah, they must be hard.
Yeah,
they must be very hard for you.
Oh my gosh! But
people think you're hard also.
The feeling's mutual. I mean, that's not to say like people aren't gonna call in sick, come in late, do dumb things, do downright like negligent or malicious acts. 100%. That is definitely going to happen. You need to not be attached to them being perfect, and just understand that there's going to be those things, because there's also going to be, along with that, people that you bring in and you have an excellent relationship with, that for them working at your company is a godsend and something they are like really thankful for. And that's who you're doing this for. That's why you plow through all that struggle, in that interim of work, getting out of the businesses, so that you can put together. Because I think almost everybody, especially in this industry, came from, oh, you know what? I'm not going to work for this joker. I'm going to go out on my own and make something better.
That's right.
Okay, well now's your chance. You can
You
can do that. Go make this better for somebody else. When I started our company, my entire thought was, I want to make something that's a job like I had that I loved. And because I got through an acquisition, got taken away and completely changed. And I said, I loved it. I want to make it for other people. And I think with that focus, you'll find the people that resonates with. And some of them, they'll find their way in and they're not right.
Yep.
But I think you have to just be able to allow people to come in, have the relationship with the company that they're going to have, and not get too crazy about it all. And you'll be in better shape.
Yeah, that's totally right. The proverb that keeps rumbling around anytime we've hit on that a couple times throughout our podcast, and it's always where there is no oxen, the stable stays clean. Right?
Yeah.
If you have an empty stable, you're not shoveling poop out of there. You're not going to feed it. Stable stays clean, but how much strength are you getting from having an ox? Right?
Sure.
Like
Sure.
it's like, it reminds me of children. It's like children are crazy. There's so much work.
They are.
It's just they're destructive and loud and and then it's like, and then your kids get older and you're like, oh my goodness, these are amazing humans. What in the world? And it's like, yeah, well, you don't get that without all the hard work, without shoveling poop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's neat. I always say that, like, when you take on an employee, you take on them and all their problems.
Yep.
Whatever baggage they're carrying is now a little bit your baggage.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
yeah.
Yep,
Yeah,
you gotta be ready
great.
for that. Oh, my
Man,
goodness.
well, we should do like, I feel like there's way more in this we could jump into, but maybe we should do like a part 2 of this.
Possibly. We'll have to listen to see if this was incoherent.
All right, thanks guys for tuning in once again to Coast Pest Talk. As always, don't forget to join our LinkedIn group, Coast to Coast Pest Talk on LinkedIn, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher. Helps to share the news about our podcast and let other people listen to this helpful info. So go rock it.